Okay, we are live, everyone. If you're just tuning in now, apologies in advance if you happen to join the other session and then had to switch. We had a little technical error with the load, so thanks for being here and glad we could get this sorted out. Again, thank you all for joining us for this live stream event. My name is Rebecca Karen. I'm the event planner of the Microsoft Reactor New York. Before we begin, I'd like to quickly review 2 items, our code of conduct and the event guidelines. For code of conduct, Microsoft is dedicated to empowering every person, every organization on the planet to achieve more. This includes Microsoft Reactor events, where we seek to provide a respectful, friendly, professional experience for everyone, regardless of gender, sexual orientation, physical appearance, disability, race, age, or religion. We don't tolerate any behavior that is harassing or degrading to any individual in any form. Individuals are responsible for knowing and abiding by these standards. We encourage everyone to assist in creating a welcoming and safe environment. In regards to the session, we just ask that you keep your comments to on topic. Sure, you can have fun with it, but just keep the focus to professional level. Thank you. Event guidelines. So this session is recorded. The recording will be available on our YouTube channel in just a couple of days for on-demand viewing. If you have questions, do drop them into the Q&A. That's at the top right of your screen. Please note that Teams live sessions have a 30-second lag in feed from speakers to audience, so there may be a little bit of a delay in response. So again, if you have questions, submit them as soon as they come up. Don't wait until the very end, because if you do, with that delay in feed, the session might conclude before we see those questions, okay? And then closed captioning. It is available to turn it on. There is a CC or live captioning icon at the bottom of your screen. If you do not see this icon, you may need to go into the session settings where there's some 3 dots and then a turn on live captions option. So today, this session, we are joined by Jen Hong and Skylar Hartle of Microsoft to build a web API with Azure Functions and Node.js. The session will run for approximately 60 minutes with time for questions throughout. If you have not already done so, please check into this session to receive the resources related to this topic. I will be dropping the check-in link and access code into the chat momentarily. Again, welcome everyone. At this time, we are happy to welcome Jen and Skylar to begin.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So I figured we start out with just kind of giving a kind of base intro to what's an API. I know that most of us know what those are, but it's always good to kind of think back, like where do things originate? Similar to like the save button, where the floppy disks come from on the save button. So API stands for Application Program Interface. It allows applications to talk to each other, and now these days it's really allowed to give access to content from outside a network. So previously, it was everything was like external interwebs. If you've ever heard that term, they allowed different programs to talk to each other through the interwebs. But now we have the internets. Yep. Oh, sorry. I went far. Come on, go back. Okay, so history in brief. So Skylar and I are a little bit older. We're not old, but we're not in our 20s. So I'm saying when we were in elementary, the original APIs were computer to computer. So databases talking to an application, or another client application talking to another client application. This is where you have the interwebs. And then when we were in high school and college, then it became like a client to server. So a server would be multiple computers together, and a client would be like your desktop. Laptops weren't big back then. We definitely did not have smartphones. Wish we did, but that we didn't. But it was you would go to school, you could have a computer, and then it would connect to a bigger server. So that was a client server at the time. And then today, it's really the web client. So anything IoT, honestly, anything connected to internet, it's a web client. So a lot of times through browsers, through your iPhone or your Android phone, those are all web clients, and they're talking to an API server, getting information back. So it's you don't have to install a bunch of stuff into one place. You can just install a client, and it could go and get information and pull it back, like you're pulling a website. So you have mobile apps, online games, IoT devices. IoT is massive today. Everything's IoT related. Think about Microsoft Mesh with HoloLens. Those are all APIs going back and forth between the device that you're using to the source of data, especially with gaming too. So APIs in the wild. Here's some examples of web-based ones: GitHub, Twitch, Spotify, Pokemon Go. If you play Pokemon Go, I'm actually really surprised that game is still around, but it's really popular around me. Instagram, Facebook, Minecraft, really anything web-based. And then we have devices too. Now we have the smart cars. We have the Tesla, we have BMW, Audi. All those have connections to internet, so they get real-time information for like traffic or weather or giving you directions, actually, like GPS navigation too. Those are all APIs. And then you have the smart devices at home. So if you have smart lights, I use Alexa to turn on and off my lights. You have your streaming medias, you have your boxes, your Roku's, those type of things are all devices that use APIs to call things. And gaming. And then just general how it all works, break it down to like you have your client to say like, I have a banana fact skill. So I say, give me a banana fact. It's asking the question through the internet. It goes through a networked firewall and it sends that question to a server. And that server replies back with the answer and then goes back through internet and then back to your computer and then gives you your fact. So it's the concept of an API is super simple and it is really the building blocks of everything that we do. But how you implement it, that can get a bit complex, and that's what Skylar's going to take you through on building an API using functions and Cosmos DB, and a little bit more about what those different services do and how you're using it to connect. So take it away, Skylar.
Take it away, me. Cool. Thank you, Jen, for that great introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here real quick. Let's see. I believe this is the one that I want. Cool. Okay. So before I go into kind of talking about Azure Functions and Cosmos DB and APIs all up, I just want to give a quick preamble. As was mentioned before, I am a program manager at Microsoft, but more specifically, I work on the Azure Functions, Azure App Service, and Azure Logic Apps teams. I've been working within this space for the past 2.5 years, and before that, I spent a lot of time working with APIs, especially in the integration space. I have seen APIs of all shapes and sizes across the board. As Jen mentioned, APIs are kind of the connective tissue now between services. And they're not terribly complex, but honestly, the distinction between an API and a web app is becoming more and more blurry. So what I'm going to show today, as Jen mentioned before, is a API, but it's an API that puts data into a Cosmos DB database, which is an Azure service. And then we're also going to update that data in the database. I have spent a lot of time working with Cosmos DB. I spent a lot of time working with Azure Functions, but I'm going to come into this kind of a session with kind of a learner's mindset here. So I tried to uninstall kind of the various tools I had installed before. I wanted to just kind of step us through this together, and as we run into issues, we'll see what happens. Whoops, sorry, that just popped up. Did I just lose my screen share? Hold on.
Must be the API.
Yeah, so Teams is having a fun day today. Cool. Okay, so with that said, let me just pull up my nifty, super organized notepad here. We're going to be, let me actually make this bigger. So hopefully in this session, we're going to be creating an API using an Azure function, namely what's called a function app, and I'll walk through what that looks like. We're going to have 2 functions contained within this function app, which will correspond to our routes, which if you're not familiar with what a route is, it's effectively just like a single API. It's 2 discrete routes that you make an HTTP request to. And the first route is going to be to create a new object in the database, which is going to be a score, which I'll talk about in a second. And then we're going to have an additional route that updates that entity in that database with a new value. So this app is super, super simple. All it's going to do is it's going to create that score, and then which is an object inside of a database, and we're just going to update a single value on that record in the database, and then keep on incrementing that value each time the update score route is called. So it'll just be +1, +1, +1, +1. So let's just go ahead and roll right into this. As a beginner, the first thing that I would do is probably dig into the docs here and figure out how we want to actually get this thing going. So I'll make this kind of bigger too so we can see. The Azure docs are kind of notoriously tricky to work through. There's a lot of really great information, but organizationally, it can be very buried. So hopefully this will provide some context too on how you can best navigate through this documentation. So what we want to do is we want to use Azure Functions with Node.js. I'm going to do this within the Visual Studio Code environment. There's a bunch of fun things you can do within VS Code, especially with the Azure Functions. So I'm going to look at the navigation menu here, and I'm going to select down to using my first function with JavaScript. All right. Looks like there's a few configuration steps we need to go through here. I already have an Azure account. That's great. I have Node.js already installed. Hopefully you do too if you want to follow along. I have Visual Studio Code installed. I do not have the Azure Functions extension installed. So let's go ahead and install this extension. I'm just going to go ahead and flip over into here. Just get sent over to the Visual Studio Marketplace, and I'll click install. It's asking me to open Visual Studio Code. Perfect. Cool, awesome. So it already flipped me back into VS Code. I had VS Code open already, so I didn't show everybody that. But I had VS Code open, and now I'm going to go ahead and install the Azure Functions VS Code extension. It's done. That was easy. Let's go ahead and go back into the portal context.
Skylar, could you zoom in a bit, please?
Yes, on the screen?
Yeah. Oh, just, yeah, whatever screen on.
Is this
My
big
eyes aren't so good these days. You know, I'm getting old.
Okay. How's this, Jen?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, perfect. So let's go ahead and walk through this. So the first thing we're going to do is create the project locally on VS Code. So what's really cool about Azure Functions and the VS Code context, the environment, is that you can develop your entire function app and the API that you're going to create locally first before you go and send it up to the cloud. And that's what we're going to do. You can do all your debugging locally and all of your testing, and it's a really awesome and quick way to get started kind of on this stuff. And actually, I want to let me take a quick sidebar with everybody here. So just as a quick explanation, in case you're not familiar with what Azure Functions is or what Azure Cosmos DB is, Azure Functions is it's basically a way to serverlessly run your application in the cloud. Other competitors, people like, in the space like AWS and Google Cloud, they have similar things. You may have heard of something like AWS Lambda in the past, which kind of helped initially spark some of the noise around this. But since then, other people like Azure and Google have been coming along and innovating in this space. I personally think that Azure Functions is the best in this space, but I might be biased given I work on Azure Functions. So I wanted to kind of start with that, is that Azure Functions is really supposed to be the quickest way for you to get an application up and running in the cloud with just your application code. However, there are a few gotchas because with any sort of powerful technology, you do have to kind of conform to specific pieces to kind of get this going. Okay, cool. And then I'll save Cosmos DB until we get to the Cosmos DB piece. Hopefully we do get to the Cosmos DB piece. Cool, so let's go ahead and step through the whole creating your local project piece here. So the first thing I'm going to do is head on over to VS Code and flip over to the Azure Functions extension that I just installed. So let's close that down. Let's also make this bigger. So hopefully everybody can see that. So on the left-hand side here, I have all my options for VS Code, Explorer, Search, Source Control, all that good stuff. I'm going to go ahead and select Azure. I should mention that I have already pre-installed the Azure extension as well, but you can follow the same process to get kind of Azure, to Azurify your VS Code environment, as I just showed for Azure Functions. So I click on my little Azure symbol and I can see that I do have functions that is available here, and I need to sign into Azure to get started. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, that was relatively painless. Let's go back over into VS Code, and it looks like I am in fact signed in. Cool. So on the top here, I have create new project, create function, deploy to function app, refresh, or collapse all of them. It looks like the first thing it wants me to do is to create that to create a new project. So let's go ahead and get this thing kicked off. All right, so I need to create a new folder where my project is going to live. And we're going to call this the Funkiest API version 4, because, you know, I've been working on the Funkiest API for a while, so why don't we just version it appropriately? You can call this whatever you want. Don't worry about that. So I'm going to select this as my project folder. And now I am prompted to select my language. Is there anything in here that I need to know as far as selecting languages go? Okay, cool. So down here, I got some information about how to kind of move through these prompts. So we are doing this from the JavaScript context. So I'm going to choose JavaScript. I need to select a template for my first function. This is kind of our first step here. So we are going to be creating an API. The way that a function app works is that you select a trigger that causes the code that you have placed in the function app to execute. So we have a bunch of different triggers for Azure Functions. We have things like blob storage, which is another Azure service, Cosmos DB, service bus, queue, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We have a bunch of different options that allow a function app to trigger, but for our purposes, because we're creating an API, we really just want an HTTP endpoint that when an HTTP request is made against it, it'll execute that function. And so we're going to select HTTP trigger. All right, so we need to create some sort of name attached to the trigger that we are associating with this function app. The first function that we're going to have in here is going to be called create new score, and this is going to correspond to actually creating the record in the Cosmos DB database. So we'll go ahead and select that. I'm going to blow past this one, just select anonymous for now if you're following along. And we're going to open this in the current window here. Sweet. So I'm going to go ahead and change this a little bit here so we can see some more of this. Zoom out just a little bit so we can see it a bit better. So we just created our first function app within the VS Code context. Awesome. If you see here on the left, a bunch of files were created for you. We'll go over some of these, but not all of them. But we'll go ahead and start with the create new source folder, and we can open that up because this is where we're going to be spending some of our time here. We'll go over function.json and index.js. We're not gonna worry about the sample.dat file right now. So function.js is effectively a JSON file that contains metadata or configuration data about the function that you just created inside this function app. We're not going to be messing with this for our purposes. Luckily for us, when we created the HTTP trigger, it actually put in all the correct parameters that we needed to worry about for this particular example. There is a lot more documentation on this if you are curious on the Azure Functions documentation page that goes over in detail what each one of these things does, but I'm not going to spend the time right now doing that. I will call out though that there are two special things in here, which are the methods, which are get and post, and these will correspond to the API routes that we are creating. But like I said, we don't need to deal with it because it already specified that we'll be making predominantly HTTP get HTTP requests and post HTTP requests. The next file is the bulk of where we're going to be spending our time, which is the index.js file, which is where you put your code to do all your fun things. So this is the code that gets executed when the function app is hit. It's a little tricky to kind of parse out at first, but I'll just kind of step by step before we start making modifications to kind of help you understand what's happening within the function apps context. So the way that this works is you effectively embed your code inside this function. This function has two parameters, context and request. Context is the function context, and then request is actually the HTTP request that was made to the function. So you can get access to the request body, headers, the query parameters, all of the stuff that would normally be inside of an HTTP request is accessible with this parameter here, which gets passed in as a JSON object.
Hey, Skylar, we actually have a great question here. So Russell asks, he always used C# for functions. Do you know of any pros or cons to use different languages?
So, sorry, did you say Russell always uses C#?
Well, Russell, one of our audience members, says he always uses C# for functions.
Yeah, as far as any, so it's funny. So functions basically on a per language basis has a different implementation kind of behind the scenes as is necessary, right? When you're running this kind of a compute strata. I wouldn't say that there's any, benefit or detractor from using one language over the other. It's more like what you're most familiar with. Obviously, C# is gets compiled down differently versus like a scripting language like Python or JavaScript. There is a world where obviously, the dependencies that you might want. So for instance, with Python, you might get access to more data science libraries or something akin to that because Python obviously has many data science uses. You might consider using Python in those cases, but honestly, it's really, it's at your preference, right? Certain languages are better for certain workloads is how to answer that. Cool.
So, no, thanks.
Sweet. Great question. Okay, so all the stuff you see here, which is this, setting a constant name, blah, blah, blah. This is just boilerplate, not specific to a function. We're going to go ahead and get rid of this just so we can kind of get a better understanding of what's actually necessary to be contained within this function app. So bare bones, the code here is basically what you need to have in a function app in order to have it work correctly. As I mentioned before, the context refers to the function context. And so what this is effectively doing down here in this little snippet is it's returning an HTTP response, and we are specifying the response that we want returned to the requester, the HTTP requester. So in this case, it's super basic. We actually default to sending a status code of 200 to the client that is requesting against this particular endpoint. And then before we had a constant here that was called the response message, right? But this can be anything. Woo, right? Doesn't need to be anything specific. You're just simply passing in the body, in the response body, this particular message. So nothing too crazy there. So let me go ahead and, sorry, I'm just kind of rearranging some of my things here. Okay, so just a quick recap. We're inside the index.js file. Everything all of the various compute happens within here. When you're ready to send the response back to the requesting client, you send the response back in some sort of a response body, right? And you can choose that kind of data that you want to get passed back. Really common paradigm, right? Just client server, request body, response body. Really common in the kind of API space and any sort of HTTP based kind of information space. I'm going to pause here and we're going to go and flip over into the Cosmos DB land because a Cosmos DB database can actually take a little while to spin up. So we're going to go ahead and create our database before we go and try to put things into it because we don't have a database to put anything into right now. So let's go ahead and Google for some documentation for Cosmos DB. All right, and I'll make this bigger. Oh, good, it's already there. Okay, so talked about functions a little bit already. Azure functions, I should clarify. Let's talk about Azure Cosmos DB. So Cosmos DB is, according to this description, a fully managed NoSQL database for modern app development. What this actually means, Cosmos DB is actually a lot of things now. So yes, it's a NoSQL database, but there's a bunch of really cool stuff you can do with Cosmos DB that you can't really do with other NoSQL databases. It has support for a bunch of different querying APIs, including things like Cassandra, MongoDB, Gremlin, Table, right? A bunch of different ways to interact with this NoSQL database. Sorry, I thought there might be a question.
Oh, actually, I was going to ask, like, for those of us who are new to databases or use traditional databases, what does NoSQL mean?
NoSQL means that you don't basically, so it's almost a misnomer at this point. And by the way, I'm also like not Mr. Data expert, so there's probably some database person out there that's going to totally give me flack for saying it like this. But the way that I think about it is that you don't have to conform to a schema like a database schema, essentially, as you would in something like a MySQL database, where you define the schema of a table and then you insert a record into that table based on that schema, right? In this case, you can really, for better or for worse, you can kind of change the schema on the fly and insert records into a NoSQL database that don't have to have a commonly shared like schema. And so you can do a bunch of really powerful things by not having to conform to this, meaning you don't have to create a brand new table just to put this record in there. You can modify things kind of ad hoc and on the fly and change out your schema as necessary. It also, in this case, there's a serverless tier for this where you only pay for what you use, more or less, from a Cosmos DB perspective. And so that's another just kind of nicety of Cosmos DB, is that you don't just have this thing just kind of like hanging out in the cloud, accruing costs.
Doesn't have to run all the time and charge you, like basically be up 24/7.
Yeah, and same thing with functions, right? So Azure Functions has that exact same kind of value proposition, which is that you can, it's oftentimes called like consumption-based pricing, where you only pay for what you use. And that's a really important distinction, right? Because a lot of these services can be really expensive, or it doesn't make sense for all these services to be on all the time. So consumption-based pricing is a great way to combat that, to address those kinds of workloads.
Try things out for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's a great place to try things out. Okay, so any other questions, Jen?
Nope, not right now. I'm sure we'll get more.
Cool. So let's go ahead. I'm going to the quick start here on the left-hand side for creating Cosmos DB resources. I'm going to choose a Node.js app because we are building a Node.js app. I'm going to skim through some of this stuff. We're not going to watch this video, obviously. I'm going to look at the prereqs. I have an account. I have Node. I have Git. Okay, I'm in pretty good shape. Let's see, we can try Cosmos DB for free. I think this is going to take us to the flow I don't necessarily want to go to. So what I'm going to do instead is go through this flow, which I believe should take me into the correct Cosmos DB flow, which is simply just I want to create a Cosmos DB resource inside my Azure portal subscription. So, well, that just took me to the quick start. Okay, we're just gonna go into the portal context, and I'll show you how to do this. So if you're not familiar with Azure at all, or you don't spend that much time inside the portal, this is the Azure portal. Let's make this bigger. The Azure portal is just another place to go and provision resources and do configuration and all that fun stuff. Some people say it's the place to go to and do this kind of stuff. So in our case, we are going to create a new resource. I see that Azure Cosmos DB is right here. How useful. I'm just going to go ahead and click on this. You could have also gotten to this by using the search bar up at the top to create resources. Let's go ahead and click the create button. So we are given a bunch of options around which API we want to use. As I mentioned before, you can use the core the SQL API. You can use the API for Mongo, Cassandra, so on and so forth. I'm pretty familiar with SQL. I like using the SQL API. I have used the Mongo API before. I have used MongoDB in the past. I actually find that the combination of using the SQL API plus getting the benefits of NoSQL is like awesome. So I'm going to stick with the SQL API for my database. I'll click create. And now I have been taken into the create screen for Cosmos DB. I'm going to go ahead and create a new resource group, which is going to be the logical group that contains all of my resources as it pertains to the Cosmos DB account that I am creating. We're going to call it the Funkiest API v4. I'm also going to create a new account name. This is effectively the account that houses all of my Cosmos DB pieces. We're going to call this the Funkiest API v4 as well. Can only contain lowercase letters. We're going to call it the Funkiest API v4 in all lowercase. And I'm going to go ahead and choose serverless as my capacity mode. And I selected to West US because I am up here in the Seattle area, although for these purposes, it doesn't really matter. Can I go ahead and review and create? Looks like it passed a nice validation check. I can see that it's being in my subscription, my resource group, the Funkiest API. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and get this thing creating. All right, so while that thing's going to go and do its thing, it's going to create. Let's go back to the docs and see what the next steps are, if we can do anything at this point before it creates. The answer to that question is no. You cannot do anything before it creates. But lucky for us, I know better. So what we're going to do while the Cosmos DB account creates is we are going to update our function app with all the necessary Cosmos DB pieces in order to get it to actually insert the data into the database. I'm actually hoping this is going to deploy faster, but we'll see. So the first thing we need to do, and also, by the way, just for context, if anybody wants to follow this this tutorial, again, you can access it over here, Node.js app. And then I just scrolled way down to the review the code section, because I find this to be one of the more helpful sections on this doc when starting to actually put the pieces in. So Azure Functions does give you the ability to use Cosmos DB with what's called an output binding, which is a way to insert data into Cosmos DB without using the Azure Cosmos DB SDK. But for the sake of this demo, we're going to use the SDK because I think the SDK is really powerful, and you get some things with the SDK that you don't get with the output binding right now. So we're going to go through this and do the SDK way. So the first thing that we need to do is actually install the SDK using npm. So let me go ahead and open up a terminal window. Yep, I know this is really tiny, so I'll make this bigger. Woo, really big. Just go into, oh, it's too big now. I can't see. The Funkiest App API v4. All right, so I'm just basically navigating into my local directory where I created the project. In this case, it was on my desktop in the Funkiest API v4. I use a MacBook, so I'm in a terminal window, but you could do this if you're on Linux. You could do this from the Linux context as well. As far as the Windows context goes, I imagine you could probably browse into this via PowerShell. I'm not as fluid on the Windows experience as I am on the Linux or the Mac OS based experience, but it would say the flow would stay fairly logically the same. So I am now in my my app. As you can see here, I'm in the Funkiest API v4. I'm going to go into my create new score folder, which is the function that we created within this function app. And I'm going to go ahead and do an npm install. And it's going to be at Azure/Cosmos. I'm going to go ahead and install that. Okay, cool. Looks like it installed the npm file. Oh, cool. It looks like it installed it at the root. That's nice. So we don't have to install it on a per folder basis. Great. So we have the Cosmos DB SDK installed that quickly, super easy. Next thing we're going to do is now integrate that Cosmos DB SDK with the function app. So let's go ahead and go back to our function app context here. So we know what we want to do is insert a new record into the database. All right. So let's go ahead and get rid of this. I don't want this. First thing we're going to need to do, it looks like, is grab the Cosmos client from the npm package. Basically, we need to import it. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste this, and I'm going to put this actually above the module.exports, basically the kind of the parent function of the function app. I'm doing this because every time that this is hit, I don't want there to be a new Cosmos client created, more or less. So I'm going to place it above this function so that it just creates that client once.
What's a Cosmos client?
Sorry, what's the Cosmos client?
What is a Cosmos client? Is that like the instance?
Yeah, the Cosmos client is basically it's the way that it's how you're going to interact with the SDK. It contains all of the helper functions, and it's how you it contains all of the methods that you're going to use to actually integrate the function app with that Cosmos DB database. So the Cosmos client's like the parent level library. We're effectively importing a library that's going to let us insert data into the database.
So you're saying so you don't have to create a client every time, so it's more efficient in a way? Sorry.
Well, when you put it at the top level, yeah. I mean, if you put it down here, like every time that a request
gets called, it would have to make
it's going to keep on creating like a client, yeah. And this is, honestly, there's people on the function side who might tell me it's totally like irrelevant, but just from a safety side, I put it up here just because it works just as well putting it at the parent level. It could be that we simply don't instantiate like a new client, like it's smart enough, but it's a great question. I don't have quite an answer to that, so I put it up there.
When in doubt, do it the best, most efficient way. So there's actually a comment about someone says they're confused because it is a SQL or NoSQL. I think it is a NoSQL database, but I think the word SQL is kind of a default term to talk about any type of database, right?
So to answer that question concretely, it's a NoSQL database, but we can query it like it's a SQL database is what we're doing here. So it's a NoSQL database like under the hood, but I'm querying it using basically a SQL query language. That's the kind of like fun thing that we can do here with Cosmos.
Very cool. So yes, we're all confused if it's SQL or NoSQL, but it's both.
it's NoSQL with a SQL-like interface, basically. But you can choose other interfaces. You can choose the API that you want to use to interact with Cosmos DB. Okay, so let's go ahead and we got the Cosmos client pulled in there. So we need to now pull in basically a new version of the client. This was the library. Now we're going to pull in a client that is actually going to initialize the library itself. So this is our client. This is where we're going to be, how we're going to be interacting with Cosmos DB. Go ahead and disregard endpoint and key. We're going to come back to that in a second once the database has been fully provisioned. In the meantime, what you can do, just as a reminder, is we can just create a couple of variables here that we're going to be filled in. So we will come back to these. Actually, we're going to come back to them now. Yay, because the next thing I want to get into is, so hopefully the Cosmos DB database has been deployed. Yay. Okay, cool. So now we got that piece done. I have bought myself enough time to have the Cosmos DB account deployed. So let's go ahead and go to the resource and start getting some of this database configuration stuff done. Okay, so congratulations, your Cosmos DB account was created. Now let's connect to it using a sample app. We're not doing that. We're going through the process of kind of doing this together. But what we are going to do is create the database and create the what is it called? The collection. So we're going to create a, sorry, let me use the right words here. We're going to create a container and a collection, I believe. But we're not going to do it through this screen here that you see. We're going to go and click on this handy dandy thing down here that says Document Explorer. And then we're going to click Open Data Explorer. And I hope if this works, that I should be able to, yes. So this is giant, so I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. Cool. I prefer the Data Explorer context. It makes the most sense to me. Data Explorer is just a way basically to actually look at the underlying database and to create new containers and collections and actually view the data once it's in there. So again, I got there by clicking through into here. Oh, I guess you can just get to it from clicking Data Explorer. That's great. Cool. Good job, Cosmos DB team, by placing that there. That was a smart move I didn't see. So I'm going to go ahead and create my container as the first thing that I do. Create a new container. And we're going to call this the score DB for the database. So we're creating the container and the database at the same time, basically. So the database contains the container. Slightly confusing, but important to know. The container will just be called scores, and our partition key, which I'm just going to ignore for the moment, we're just going to set it to ID. I'm not going to go into why we need to set that right now, but let's go ahead and get that going. And I'm going to go ahead and click OK. So this should hopefully create a new database and create a container within that database, and I'll show you that relationship once this finishes creating here in just a moment. Assuming it does. I really hope that it does. Yay, it did. Okay, cool. So on the left-hand side here, we can see that we have SQL API. We see score DB. If we hit the little arrow, this is the database. We see that we have a container inside the database called scores. If we click on scores, we have a bunch of things down here, but what's most pertinent to us is basically this items tab, which if you click on, this is where all of our data is contained for this database. Okay, it's in the scores DB, it's in the score DB and the scores collection, and then the data will be inserted into this place called items. Let's go ahead and kick back over to the quick start really quick here. Where are you? Okay, perfect. So from here, it wants us to select the tasks database, and they're using a specific example, but in our example, what we're going to do is come back over here, and we're going to create another few constants called database, which we're going to name scoreDB, and we're going to create something called container, which is going to be called scores, and these are going to get used in a moment here. Cool. But before we do that, let's go ahead and address the endpoint and the key issue. So now that we have our database, we can flip back over to here, and we can go and find the keys associated with this database in order for us to make the connection between Cosmos DB and the Cosmos DB SDK that we're pulling into the function apps context. So we will need the URI. This is the endpoint that we mentioned before. Again, keys can be found over here. We're going to go ahead and copy that to the clipboard. I'm going to put that into here because that is our endpoint. And we need the primary key, which is here. Then go ahead and grab that. Okay. Let's go ahead and do that. Woo! Okay. Cool. So now we have our endpoint, we have our key, we have our client that's been initialized. Okay, that's looking good. For the sake of just organization here, I'm going to rearrange the order of some of these things. The client should be good to go. Let's go ahead and revisit what our next thing to do here is. So the next thing we're going to want to do is basically access our database and then access the container within the database. Cool. So let's go ahead and grab this piece of code here, and I'll kind of explain what this is going to do. So we're creating let's name these to this. There we go. That's more specific. So we have a constant name database, which gives us access to our database, all the functions and the methods within our database. And then we just want to access a specific database, which we know is named ScoreDB. So we're just using that as our association. We want to get access to the container. So let's go ahead and I think it was database.container and then the container ID. Okay, so we're making constant references right back to the database. The database makes a reference back to the client. The client is an instantiation of the Cosmos SDK, basically. So we're just having to kind of pull these things in so that we can actually insert the data into the database. Okay, so now we have access to the container. Let's go ahead and write our first query, a really simple one, where we just where we're just going to go ahead and insert an item into the database. So let's actually do it inside here because this is where we're going to do the inserting. So I'm going to go ahead and start writing this query here. This item will be called insert query. Hold on one moment here. Actually, let's call this, sorry, let's not call this the query. Let's call this a insert the score. Let's call this the score item. This is going to be the item that we insert into the database. The actual command, the actual function we use to insert into the database will be, we'll show that in a second, but we're going to go ahead and name this item. We can name this anything we wanted to, but for the sake of kind of illustrating how we can more dynamically pull in this data from a request, for example, let's go ahead and give this thing a name that comes out of a query parameter from an HTTP request. And I'll show how this kind of works end to end. Let's also give this thing a score, and we'll just give it a score of 0.
I'd like to call out that you should never store your keys in your code.
Yes, absolutely. This, for the sake of this.
Yeah. If you're just doing your own testing and initial development, yeah, sure. But the worst is also storing it to, publishing it to GitHub, which now GitHub scans it, so it helps you so you don't do that. But yeah, it's definitely not good practice to store your keys in code.
Yes, thank you for calling that out, Jen. I appreciate that. Yeah, just for the sake of this demo, I'm just kind of doing this quick and dirty.
Yeah, it's actually from Russell. Russell made a good point. Thank you, Russell.
Go, Russell, go. Yeah, thanks, Russell. Appreciate it. Okay, so we now have the score item with the name of the score item is going to get inherited from the HTTP request. We set the score to 0. Great, perfect. Let's go ahead and enter this into the database. So to do that, we're going to just do a little bit of deconstructing here just so we can get the response back out. What we need to do is we're going to do an await, which is going to wait for the response to come back. And then we're going to call a method on that container that we created, the up further above here, container, right, which contains our functions that help us do things like inserts. And we're going to do container dot items dot, and you can see a bunch of things. We have a bunch of options here. We can create an item, query, read all, upsert, so on and so forth. For our purposes, we're going to create, and we're going to go ahead and put that the score item into there. Perfect. So now, if we look through this, looks pretty solid. We got just kind of looking over this, making sure everything looks good. ScoreDB, score, we have our endpoint, we have our key, we've got our score item that's going to be inserted into the database. We have the actual call that inserts the item into the database. And then we actually don't have a response message, so why don't we do like response message equals yay, successfully inserted this item into the database. May or may not be the case. But this is all looking good right now. But now, the moment of truth. Let's go ahead and save this. and we're going to go up to run. So we need to take a bit of a, we're going to have to take a bit of a preamble here again, or a bit of a sidebar again. So like I mentioned before, Azure Functions lets you debug and run things locally. The first time that you go to actually run a function locally, it's going to yell at you and say you need to install this special thing called Azure Functions Core Tools. It'll give you instructions on where to go to actually download those and install that piece of it. You can install this if you're on the Mac through Brew. If you're on Windows, you can install it through an executable. There's a few different ways to follow this, but I do want to preface this that the one thing that I did pre-install was Core Tools because it is kind of specific to your environment. And so I went ahead and did that for my sake so that we could do this a bit quicker. So Azure Functions Core Tools, important piece of this. It will yell at you that you need to get it. So I'm going to go up to Run and click Start Debugging, which should pull up a terminal window. Just going to go through. And what you're seeing now is the response generated by Azure Functions Core Tools. You can see it's right here. And actually now I have Core Tools running, and it stood up a web server for me already. So I can actually, if I click this, it will fire off this function that we have created as an API, as an HTTP endpoint. And hopefully, if it works, we will be able to go back to the browser and look at Data Explorer and see that we have inserted an item into this database. Here's the moment of truth. So let's go ahead and click on this. Okay, that's promising. Let's go back over here. It looks like it was successfully executed, so at least we didn't run into any errors in the code or configuration issues. Let's go back into our database here and go to Data Explorer. Go into our ScoreDB, scores, click on items, and let's give this a second to actually pull up the data. Hey,
look at the query on top. It says star from. It's like your SQL.
I know, right? Yeah, there it is. But yeah, so we did successfully create an item with a score of 0. However, one thing we didn't do was that we didn't pass anything in the query param. So let's go back and create another item. So just because it's an API endpoint, we can go ahead and have some fun stuff with this. So let's go ahead and pass in a query param called, yeah, funkiest API score. Clearly, I've done this once before. So hopefully that took. Let's go look to see it back at the back in VS Code if that actually executed. It looks like it did succeed. So let's see if the name got passed in this time around. Do a quick refresh. That's a dangerous thing.
Well, it's refreshing really quick. There's a question from Michael about visualization of data in the Cosmos DB. Do you know, I know that Power BI can do that, but do you know of other tools?
I am not sure. Like, you mean taking the data out of Cosmos DB and doing visualization on it, or
just be able to see what's in there? I'm thinking.
I am not familiar with, like, I wish I could answer this question like in a better way. I am not super familiar with how the data can get visualized inside Cosmos DB. I'm familiar with Data Explorer, but yeah, that would be, it's a great question. But yeah, sorry I don't have an answer.
You can't be an expert in everything. It's okay.
At
least you know functions, right?
Yeah, at least. And a little bit of Cosmos. Okay, cool. So we passed in, kicking back over to here. This is, I wish I could make the browser bigger. Hold on. Is there a way I can zoom? I can't make the browser bar bigger. If somebody knows how to, that would be kind of zoom. That did not do what I wanted to do at all. Well, in any case, sorry. This is really tiny up here. Where I'm highlighting, I passed in a query param called name. We can see that it did in fact get passed in as a new record, and so now we have an object named name with a score of 0. And going back to our function kind of context here, now that let me go ahead and make this a little bit smaller so we can actually see this. Bump. Yay, you successfully inserted this item to the database. And it looks like it did what we expected it to do. So we now have a function app that runs locally, connects to Cosmos DB, and inserts the data into there based on a query parameter that was passed in a query string from an HTTP request. Of course, we're using a query param just for the sake of ease, but you could also grab items from post body. That's a very common way. For instance, when somebody submits a form on a website, that form might get submitted as a post, and all the post, the data within that form is then transmitted in the request body. And then you can take that data and put it into a database as you would normally do. Very, very common thing to do within the world of application development. Heading back over to our kind of our view here. So I don't think I'm going to have enough time to go through and actually create the second API here, the second endpoint, which would update this. But just to kind of show you how easy it is to continue to modify this function app now that we have it established. If I want to add an additional route to this function app, I just go to Azure here. I click create function, and then it pops me into the whole like function create experience. So I'll just quickly go through this piece of it though. So let's create a new function. We'll call this update score, anonymous, and the function has now been created. And I mean, just that quickly. And now we have all of the files again. You can see that in addition to create new score over here, I have update score, which again gives you all that same kind of fun functions context. I do have, I'm not going to step through this end to end, but I actually do happen to have this code written ahead of time. So I will at least show kind of what this looks like from a completed perspective. So let me go ahead and grab that. And we're going to just copy and paste all of that in. And I will need to grab our endpoint and our key from the previous one over here. Let's grab this. Just doing a little bit of shifting. Yep. Create new score. Let's grab the key. Because we need to make sure that it's hitting against the right database. All right. Okay, so looking through this, cool. So like I said, unfortunately, I'm not going to have the time to go through this in detail, but what this function does is it updates the score. It basically goes and it grabs, it queries for all of sorry, excuse me. I forgot that I changed this today. It queries for a specific record based on a name that's passed in from a query param. So, and then it grabs that record, it grabs all the data associated with that record, it updates the score value. So if the score is like 0, it'll update it to 1. If the score is 1, it'll update it to 2. And then it submits that record back into the Cosmos DB database. And then it sends a nice little message that says you've successfully increased the score by 1. So if we go back into Cosmos DB, we can see that we have an object named funkiest API score. I'm going to go ahead and grab that. I'm going to go ahead and start the debugging process here. Hopefully it works. Let's find out. Cool. Okay, so because I created a new function within that function app, I now have a new function that's showing up here under core tools that says update score, has the same kind of HTTP methods that can be used with it. I'm going to go ahead and grab this one though, because we want to find yeah, that's just going to break. Let's see, no surprises on that one because I didn't pass in the name. Hold on. Where is it? No. I'm trying to kick out of my terminal here.
Oh, control right doesn't work. Oh.
There it is. Okay. Thank you. Okay, let's go back to debugging. Okay, cool. Okay, so we grabbed that. Let's not have that happen again. Okay, we're gonna go here. We're gonna pass in, I believe we said the name was funkiest API score. Hit enter, and it's broken. Let's see why. This might be this might just be serendipity. Let's figure out where this is having a bad time.
Failure, exception executing function.
It's because
Resource not found?
we changed the, I know what it is. Coding in real time. I changed the container from, I believe if we go back over here, yeah, I need to change my container ID to scores instead of score. So that is why this broke. Let's do this one more time. See if we can get this thing working. Okay.
That's what I love about doing in VS Code is like you can actually debug it real time, see what's happening.
Yes,
You don't
can.
output to a terminal window.
Yeah, I know. It's amazing, right? Like it's just like I just get it, I fixed it, and it looks like it worked. But let's go back and make sure it did. Let's go ahead and refresh Cosmos DB. Come back into here. Can I just click this button to refresh? I might be able to. If I go to the funkiest API score, we see that it has a score now of 1. Let's just hit this. Let's just hammer it a few times here. Can I just click refresh? No, that's not how it works. Stop. That would be so useful.
That would be too easy. Right?
Yeah, I know. I was like, darn. Okay, I just wailed on the API like 5 times. I don't know if you could see that. I was smashing my refresh button, and we see that we have incremented it up to a score of 10.
What's that refresh right next to the ID column? Is that?
Let's try that one just for fun. Okay, I'm smashing on it again. Oh, there it goes.
There you go. So there's 2 refresh buttons. Use the one next to the ID.
Yeah.
Pro tip right here.
The things you learn, right?
Yeah, you're only gonna hear it here. No one else knows about this little trick.
Cool. So last thing I'll do, and then we can wrap this thing up. And we'll see how long this takes. But finally, now that it's all tested locally, you're good to go. You go back to the kind of Azure Functions extension, which is, here's your file explorer, here's your Azure and Azure extension stuff. You can just click deploy to function app, and we can actually create the function app that gets deployed to the cloud all from right here. So let's just going and grabbing all my pre-existing function apps. We don't want any of those. We'll call this the funkiest API v4. We're using Node as our runtime. We're going to use West US2. And now it's going through the process of actually creating and deploying that function app in the cloud so that this is going to go live. And this is going to take a second. But while this kind of deploys, are there any other questions in the chat, or anybody want to see anything that wasn't shown at this point? You got any questions, Jen?
I want to see more of the funkiest API. What else can we do with this stuff?
What else can we do? What else can we do with the funkiest API? Boy,
yeah, I would love to like do a follow-up, like maybe something with it, create some sort of UI for it.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think that additionally, what we might want to do, and let's see if I can do this while it's actually trying to deploy. I haven't tried this before, but in addition to creating the object initially and updating it, you can also create a way that, deletes the score, right? So that's another common like API endpoint that you would have. So update, delete, and then one that maybe gets the score, right? Oops, I need to actually do this.
Are these all part of the same function, or are they different functions that you're creating?
So these are actually all part of the same function app, different functions I'm creating. So the key differentiation here is that there's the function app, which has many functions inside of it. So in this case now, I just created 2 new functions inside the function app. There's nothing in those functions yet, but we can start to create the kind of the scaffolding that helps us as we think through like what we want our API to be and how we want it to be structured.
Yep. All the different behaviors, or as we call them, methods in API world.
Yep, all the different methods and whatnot that you want to have. Yeah, it's super powerful. I love scaffolding my APIs inside functions for this reason, because I can just be like boom, 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 and just get it all out of my head in that way. I think so this is currently going through the process of provisioning, but I think that's pretty much it. I think that hopefully this was a good kind of quick primer on how to use Azure Functions and Azure Cosmos DB to create an HTTP endpoint and actually put data from that endpoint into Cosmos DB.
And I did drop your Twitter handle in there, Tiny Lobster.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate
that. I'm sure you're going to have more live streams of doing stuff with the funkiest API, I hope.
I hope so too. I would love to keep on building this out, and I think it'd be fun to throw maybe a really basic React front end in front of it. I'd love to come back and do that.
Yeah, because it's really like, again, APIs are the building blocks of everything, but like you just start small, and then start building. I think a lot of times we try to want to build like a whole, I don't know, like a Facebook app or something, and just not like you just can't jump into that. You got to start with these building blocks and.
Oh, sure, yeah,
and type of things.
Absolutely. Yeah, and more people are doing API kind of first approaches where you think through those API layers and think through the data concerns and all of that. And it's just an awesome way to decouple the functionality of your front end and your back end, right? By thinking through the API layer first.
Something breaks, you can. That's like microservices in a way, as we call it. So one thing goes down, other things are still working. You put stuff in, then you can also update things a lot faster and deploy things.
100%.
Yeah.
Yep.
You just have to remember the names of things. You have to name consistently.
Yeah.
Look at that.
Look, we're deployed. That's great. What do stream logs do? I think this is just going to connect the log streaming. Sorry, I am like a squirrel. I'll stop here. Thanks again. This has been really fun to create this, and hopefully people got value out of this.
It's is that the URL available?
Let's see if I got the.
Or we drop it into the chat thing. People can hit it. We can kind of see it. See, next session will be creating the front end. So we'll have this URL, and you just hit it, and you'll see the numbers increment. That'd be really cool.
I honestly, yeah, it usually spits out the URL to me, and I totally lost it now at this point. It's somewhere kicking around here, but I can drop it in once I find it. You know what? Here, hold on. Okay, while we're here, let's just do it really quick. Let's go back over here. Let's go into the function app. This is the portal context again, obviously. Let's go into function app. Come on. So
I scroll too, because there's always interesting things like, oh, let me try this. What does this do? Does this break stuff?
Boom. Okay. So there this is. Can I paste this into Teams? How do I get
yeah, if you switch, if you see the Q&A, there should be like make an announcement. You can just drop it in there. Hit enter.
All right, hold on, people. Make an announcement. That name equals funkiest API v4. Hold on, let's make sure that before I paste this in, it doesn't just absolutely break. What was the name of the update score? Funkiest API score. That's what it was. Name equals funkiest API score. I haven't even tried this yet. I guess I'll click on it to see what happens. Oh, I'm sorry. I just linked you. Okay.
You need the method. You need slash.
Crucial thing here. Yeah, that's the overall function app URL, but it is not the function URL. I need to go over here and get my function URL. My bad. Let's go ahead and get that. Update score name equals. What did I say it was? It was funkiest API score.
All right, so if we click on it, it should work.
Okay, now if people wail on it, I should be able to go back into Cosmos now. Whoever's still sticking around, I hope you're enjoying the show. Now we're just playing around. If I go into Cosmos here, and I go to the funkiest API v4, go to Data Explorer, Score DB, scores, items. It's at 40. It's at 43. I don't know if somebody, 46. It's going up 50. 52. Okay. All right.
So we know it works, right?
Yeah.
There you go.
We can see it's working. It's deployed all in an hour. Cosmos DB, Azure functions, APIs. My voice is getting tired. Again, this has been good. I've had a lot of fun. I hope to come back.
Yes, this has been fun. Great learning, and thank you for all the great questions. It's
awesome. Thank you guys so much. This was wonderful. I know we ran a little bit over time, for whoever stuck around, you guys are a bunch of troopers. We appreciate you hanging out with us and tuning in for this Reactor Live session. Very much live, so, you know, on the fly coding. Glad that you all could join us, that Skylar and Jen could be a part of this series. I've dropped the series link into the chat for anybody that is interested that was not aware. This is an ongoing series. We have a few more sessions coming up. Definitely check it out. We also, as mentioned earlier, this is on a recording session, so it will be available on our YouTube in just a few days. We'll upload it there. If you have any future questions or anything, do feel free, look up Skylar and Jen. You know, they're on Twitter, they're on LinkedIn. I'm sure they'd love to answer some of your questions as well. Until next time, everyone, thank you all so much. And do, if you're not already part of our community, check it out. We're on Meetup, where we have a newsletter, aka.ms/reactor email sign up. We send that out once a month regionally to sessions that are related to your time zone. Find us on Twitter and check out our website, microsoftreactor.com. All right, y'all. Thank you all very much and have a good evening or good morning, depending on where you're tuning in from.
Yeah.
Cool.
Take care.